Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. Drop your city in the comments. Where are you tuning in from? My husband Richard forbade me from ever setting foot in his secret house on Folly Beach. It's my sanctuary, Lena, he'd say with a charming but firm smile. My chaos. Trust me, you wouldn't like it. For 25 years I trusted him, but now he was gone. His life cut short in a sailing accident 2 weeks ago. I stood on the weathered porch of the forbidden cottage, the salt-laced wind whipping my hair, his hidden key cold in my trembling hand. His lawyer, his friends, my own brother, they all thought I was at home grieving. But I had to know. After his death, I finally opened the door, expecting to find evidence of an affair, maybe a secret child. But what I saw instead made the blood freeze in my veins. It wasn't another life he was hiding. It was mine. My name is Lena Vance, and for most of my 52 years, I thought I had a life as beautifully composed as the antebellum portraits I restore in my Charleston studio. Our world was one of historic townhouses, humid evenings spent on the piazza, and the gentle clinking of ice in sweet tea. Richard was a force of nature, a brilliant maritime lawyer, respected by everyone in the Low Country. He was handsome, charismatic, and utterly devoted to me. Or so I believed. Our love story felt like something out of a Nicholas Sparks novel. He'd swept me off my feet when I was a broken young woman, still reeling from my family's sudden spectacular downfall. My father, a proud man who ran a small legacy shipping line, had lost everything to a hostile takeover by some anonymous, ruthless conglomerate. The bankruptcy shattered him, and he passed away a few years later, a ghost of his former self. Richard had been my rock through it all. He loved hearing stories about my family's history, about the glory days of the shipping company. I thought it was his way of honoring the father I'd lost. The only strange note in our otherwise perfect harmony was the beach house. He bought the small cottage on Folly Beach early in our marriage. It was his private workspace, he claimed. He'd spend a few days there every month working on sensitive cases. The one rule, the only one in our entire marriage, was that I was never to go there. He made it sound like he was protecting me from the ugliness of his work. I accepted it. Why wouldn't I? He gave me everything else. Now, looking back, the red flags were there, fluttering just at the edge of my vision. The way he would subtly steer conversations away from the specifics of my father's bankruptcy. The way he acquired certain pieces of art, pieces that looked uncannily like ones my family had been forced to sell off. Just a coincidence, my love, he'd say, kissing my forehead. Great minds think alike. My brother Mateo never bought it. He was a journalist, cynical by nature, and he always found Richard a little too polished, a little too perfect. Doesn't it seem weird to you, Lena? He'd ask. A man who shares everything but one whole house? I always defended Richard, accusing Mateo of being overly suspicious. Now his words echoed in my ears as I stood in the doorway of that house, the truth hitting me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a secret bachelor pad. It wasn't a lover's hideaway. It was a museum of my stolen past. The air inside was thick with the scent of lemon oil and old wood, the exact scent of my childhood home. My breath hitched. The living room was a painstaking, terrifyingly accurate replica of the one I grew up in. There was the faded floral armchair my mother used to read in, the one we sold at a heartbreaking estate sale. There was the mantelpiece clock that chimed off-key, its familiar, flawed song a ghost from my youth. On the walls hung portraits of my ancestors, their stern faces staring down at me, their eyes seeming to ask how I could have been so blind. I stumbled through the house like a trespasser in my own memories, each room a new chapter of the life that had been ripped away from me. It was all there, furniture, photographs, even my old collection of porcelain dolls, lined up on a shelf in a small bedroom. It was a shrine, a mausoleum. But why? My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Was this some grand romantic gesture he never got to reveal? A bizarre attempt to give me back what I'd lost? The answer, I soon discovered, was far more sinister. I found his office at the back of the house. Unlike the rest of the cottage, this room was modern and sterile. Filing cabinets lined one wall, and a large mahogany desk dominated the center. On the desk sat a single leather-bound folder. My name was embossed on the cover in gold leaf. My hands shook so violently I could barely open it. Inside was not a love letter, but a meticulously documented history of a crime. It contained contracts, shell corporation registrations, and offshore bank statements. It was a step-by-step blueprint of how an anonymous entity systematically dismantled my father's company, devalued its assets, and bought it for pennies on the dollar. The architect of my family's ruin, the man who broke my father's heart and spirit, was Richard, my loving husband. It turned out, his fascination with my family history wasn't romantic. It was proprietary. He had married me to get closer to the legacy he'd stolen. And according to the documents, he believed one piece was still missing. A final letter, written by his lawyer just months before his death, spoke of the urgency to acquire the final asset to solidify his claim over the company's historical patents. The asset was described as the Charleston Bell, an obscure painting my father had made. It was the only thing I had managed to keep, the one piece of my past I refused to let go. Richard had offered to buy it from me countless times, claiming he wanted to have it professionally preserved. I always refused. It was too sentimental. I sank to the floor, the cold reality washing over me. My entire life, my marriage, my security, it was all built on a foundation of lies, greed, and the deliberate destruction of my family. I wasn't his wife, I was his final acquisition. I immediately called Mateo, my voice a choked whisper. "You were right," I managed to say. "You were right about everything." Within the hour, he was there. His face, usually a mask of journalistic skepticism, was a canvas of pure fury as I showed him the contents of the house and the folder. While I had been drowning in shock, his mind was already working. "The will reading is next week," he said, his voice hard. "He won't get away with this, Lena. Not even in death." We examined the painting, which I'd brought with me. Mateo, ever the investigator, noticed the frame was unusually thick. Using a small pocket knife, he carefully pried open the back panel. Tucked inside was not a letter, but a folded yellowed document. It was my great-grandfather's original, hand-signed corporate charter for the shipping line, a document that, according to a hastily scribbled note from my father, proved the company's core assets were structured as a family trust, making a hostile sale legally impossible. My father had been tricked, not legally outmaneuvered. Richard knew this document was missing, and he needed it to close the loop on his fraud. This painting wasn't just a painting. It was the key to reclaiming everything. The day of the will reading felt like a scene from a movie. We sat in a sterile, wood-paneled conference room at Richard's prestigious law firm. His partner, a pompous man named Arthur Davenport, presided over the meeting, his expression one of feigned sympathy. He began to read the will in a monotonous drone. Richard had left me the Charleston townhouse, his art collection, my art collection, and a generous living stipend. It all sounded wonderful on the surface. But then came the catch. The rest of his estate, including his controlling interest in a massive holding company, was to be placed in a trust. A trust to manage the Vance Maritime Legacy. The sole executor and trustee of this fund? Arthur Davenport. He would have complete control. My inheritance was a gilded cage. Arthur paused, giving me a smug, pitying look. "Richard wanted to ensure you were taken care of, Lena, without being burdened by complex business matters." That was my cue. I placed my hand on the table, stopping him. "That won't be necessary, Arthur," I said. my voice ringing with a newfound clarity and strength. I could feel Mateo's supportive presence beside me. I slid the original charter across the polished table. I believe this predates any of Richard's acquisitions. Arthur's face went pale. He stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake. "What is this?" he stammered. "That's the original charter of my family's company," I stated calmly. "The one your client, my late husband, fraudulently acquired by exploiting a grieving man. A company structured as an unbreakable family trust." I then produced copies of the documents from the Folly Beach house, laying them out one by one. The evidence of the shell corporations, the illegal asset stripping, the meticulously planned deception. "Richard didn't build a legacy," I declared, my voice rising. "He stole one, and you, Arthur, were his accomplice. This will is invalid because its primary assets were obtained through criminal fraud." The room erupted. The firm's lawyers began whispering furiously. Arthur Davenport sputtered, his face a mottled shade of red, but there was nowhere for him to run. The paper trail was undeniable. My grief had been replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't the fragile widow they expected. I was the daughter of a proud shipping magnate, and I was taking my family's name back. The legal battle was long and messy, but with the evidence from the secret house and the original charter, the outcome was never in doubt. The courts nullified Richard's acquisition, and Vance Shipping was returned to my family. Arthur Davenport was disbarred, his reputation destroyed. Mateo and I decided not to rebuild the company into a corporate giant. Instead, we revived it on a smaller scale, focusing on sustainable shipping and fair trade, honoring the true spirit of our father's vision. We sold the Charleston townhouse, which felt haunted by Richard's lies, and I moved into a smaller, light-filled studio in the Arts District. The Folly Beach cottage, that monument to my husband's twisted obsession, was the first thing to go. I had it emptied and sold, and I never looked back. Healing is not a linear process. There are days when the weight of 25 years of deception feels crushing. But then I look at the Charleston Bell, my father's painting, which now hangs in my new home. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of frames, there can be a hidden truth waiting to set you free. I am not Richard's grieving widow or his final acquisition. I am Lena, a restorer of art and of legacies, and for the first time in a very long time, I am the sole author of my own story. If this story hit home, hit the like button, comment one below, and share your own story. Subscribe for more.